There are two Zakis on my screen. It's really something.
Yes. But on the live stream screen, there's only one Zaki.
Okay. There's two on mine, and I'm like, did I say blockchain 6 times? And now there are two? Should I never say it again? Are we going to get more of that?
Oh, I see us live. There's me yawning. Perfect timing. Look at that.
Awesome. Okay, we are live. Jessy, do you want to tweet?
Oh, yeah, I already have the tweet written. We really have to do better cold intros for our audience, guys.
I know, we do need a better cold intro scenario. The cold intros have always been awkward.
I mean, but it's not a stream unless there's 3 people on screen talking about how they need to tweet to get more people there, right? Like, that's the only way to start a stream.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh. All right. A few folks showing up so far. Hey, everybody.
Welcome to the Phase 2 Game of Zones live stream.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody. It's been an eventful past week in the Game of the Zones.
Yeah. The zones have been humming. We've actually seen like a fully functional operating internet of blockchains. And that's been really cool.
At scale, I might add.
Yes, at considerable scale. And that's certainly also interesting. So we're just going to kick this off. Jessy, do you want to kind of take us into our little agenda?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we should probably talk about is that we got to announce some Phase 1 winners this week.
Yes.
We spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out the best way to do judging, especially since we had a false start, and then we had an intermission, and then we had a tiny, second iteration of the first phase. And yes, we know that was frustrating, and we were also frustrated, but the competition really, really was fantastic last week. And we were able to basically create 2 prizes for Phase 1. So for Phase 1A, we have 4 winners. We have IrisNet, Sentinel, P2P.org, and Atomic Bombers. So congratulations, you guys. And then for Phase 1B, we have KiraCorp who won. So we were pretty excited just when we were looking through the data to be able to address, fantastic participation during Phase 1A, even though the network was not behaving rationally or in a way that any of us had expected. And what we're hoping to see moving forward, we didn't get as many technical write-ups as we were hoping to get in the competition for the Gaia reward. And that reward is the same amount of atoms as a weekly challenge winner. So we're really hoping to see more knowledge sharing and more write-ups about IBC and the technical experience of participating in the competition, even bugs that you find. Because that kind of knowledge sharing is really important to the health of the ecosystem and the spread of knowledge that's going to really make IBC incredible.
Absolutely. And I'd say the biggest takeaway from looking through the data on Phase 1A, when like the phases was one, the big reason why we came up with the 4 winners of Phase 1A is, in spite of the design issues with the challenge with Phase 1A, there were 4 teams that essentially did the thing, which was pretty amazing, and would have taken an enormous amount of work, under those conditions to keep a connection live with a 90-minute interval over multiple days when the network was overloaded and all of these other bits and pieces and faults that came from the design issues. And then the second thing was, to a certain extent, Phase 1B was like a little bit of a gamble. There were, and Kira Core was both good and lucky and picked the right like sort of parameter that gave them the right offset, whereas a number of other teams had chosen sort of shorter trust periods and kept it going for longer. But yeah, super glad for how all of this turned out, and we're working on announcing everybody who won the Liveness Award. We're expecting something in the neighborhood of 60 or 70 teams, so you know, most people will be who've been playing along should be in that category.
Yeah, it was a massive undertaking to be able to make sure that we correctly and fairly judged phase 1A and phase 1B. And when we're looking at a set of, you know, more than 50 winners, it becomes really an act of double and triple checking everything. And we really want to make sure that we've looked at the data, we're giving everyone credit who deserves credit for their performance. So thanks for being patient, but we hope to have that out at the end of the day today.
Judging every one of these phases is a massive undertaking. You know, we have 80 gigabytes of data from phase 2 from the Sagan logs, and some pretty complicated questions that we're going to have to sort of
Yeah, you know, I think if we expanded like to really get fully accurate data, we would need full data dumps from every client chain on the hub in addition to the hub data dump, and we would need to basically go on a block by block basis and pull all of that. I would say that process is likely infeasible given the amount of manpower we have and other things, but I do think the data that I've seen so far that we've gathered should be sufficient to score, because they're, you know, very, very cool results in phase 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little? Should I dig a little bit more into the data stuff, Jessy?
Yeah, go ahead. I think we probably want to talk about phase 2 a little bit as well. So.
Yeah. The data stuff's probably a good way to intro that too.
Yeah.
So, you know, phase 2, I think, looks to be a big success. It's going to be challenging to fully score it. There's been some unofficial scoreboards floating around. I have no idea how they work. You know, what Sagan was designed to do was give everybody a visibility into, like, are we getting data from your chain? Are we getting data from your relayer? Like, are we able to see what you're generating? I'd say probably the two there are like a couple of sort of big outstanding questions with how we're going to score phase 2. So one is there is a bug in the message.sender field of the events that's causing basically the last transaction in a block has the message.sender for all the previous transactions and recursively back to the first transaction in the block. But I also think that's going to be pretty easy to filter out. So that's one piece. So there's a bunch of data cleaning, and we're talking about all of that. The second issue is this issue of I know there are like chains that we got disconnected from either while I was asleep or just didn't get notified that people stopped appearing in the dashboard, and I'm gonna have to come up with some sort of strategy to sort of backfill that data. It might be easiest to sort of backfill that data when we're looking at maybe like the top 2 or 3 teams, but we'll see what the data has to definitely keep your a full node or a data dump from phase 2 around. It will definitely help us with sort of figuring out the scoring and trying to find gaps, fill in gaps that are in the Sagan data. Though I am really pleased with how well Sagan performed in general. And then the third thing has been this like very thorny question of how to deal with multi-messages. Jessy, do you want to talk a little bit about how we decided to cut that Gordian knot?
So one of the things that we basically put in place in terms of thinking is a one-to-one mapping when it comes to data, to chains, and things like that. You know, we understand that puts some constraints on the way that we score the competition and the way that we judge things. And one of the areas, especially when we were thinking through judging, that we didn't have a good answer for was how to handle multi-messages. And we talked a lot in phase 2 about, you know, judging the most packets that are sent, but we didn't really think through what the multi-message story might be. So I think what probably makes the most sense here, since we have more rewards and more prizes than just the weekly challenges, is that we're going to include the multi-messages in the calculations for the overall reward for most packets sent throughout the competition. We've seen, some teams who've sent the multi-messages and all throughout phase 1A. We've seen some teams just start that during phase 1B, but because that's something we hadn't fully incorporated and worked into our thinking for phase 2, we'll just do a little bit of an update to the scope this afternoon when we post technical details and connection information to clarify how we'll be thinking about that particular part of the competition.
And for people who are going to be participating in phase 3 and mostly focusing on, the cumulative most messages relayed stuff, there's lots of opportunity to kind of experiment with multi-messages in phase 3.
Yep.
So maybe like a good transition point for talking about phase 3?
Maybe. Did we talk any about some of the zone-on-zone activity that's been going on? I know we had a couple of teams who have been buying pretty heavily for the most creative zone, which is a surprise, basically.
Well, that's a good topic. I'd love to get into that. I would also like to, we really talked about how we saw Tendermint stressed beyond anything that we had seen before, and especially with the encoding changes, we're seeing new areas of bottlenecks. So maybe creative zone first, but I'd love to dig into that piece of it as well.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of zone-on-zone, like zone-to-zone communication across the interchain, where people were, relaying transactions. One of the big things that we communicated about phase 2 is like, look, we expect the hub to be unstable. We are definitely not trying to, exactly how, the only performance tuning Tendermint for this kind of condition. And what's really interesting and unique about this set of conditions is just what does it look like when you have a Tendermint chain that frankly just a lot of people are interested in. So they're both sending a lot of transactions and a lot of clients want to download the blocks as quickly as possible. And so we got a real sense of what kind of bottlenecks and limitations when you have a Tendermint network, that's generating fairly large blocks once a second. And where can they, how do they get propagated out, basically? So on the custom zone stuff, I actually haven't seen too much yet on sort of custom creative zones. I know they're kind of out there, and I'm really looking forward to some write-ups of what people have been running in Game of Zones.
I've seen Coco Chain is out there. I've seen a login interface for it. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I do know that they're going to have a full web UI ready for phase 3. That's also closely related to the full web UI. You can verify your Twitter account on it, and it's pretty cool. And then I do know there's the FreeFlix Media Hub. Bitsong has been doing fantastic work with a fully custom chain that they're working on, and I do know Angelo will likely have some sort of UI for that as well. The Agoric folks with the VM are going to show up. I think that there's going to be a Cosm Wasm instance that some folks are running. What was the other one that I've run into? And then there was a hackathon project from one of the teams over in Korea that I think Dogemus is working with. That's also a custom chain as well, and that's pay crypto to flip bits in a field, and it's sort of this community collaborative image thing, and that was pretty cool. Anyway, yeah, I think that it seems like most of the custom zones that I've seen are all kind of gearing up for phase 3, where we will see a lot more of that. Oh, also MicroTick has been running their UI and showcasing Oracle stuff, as have the band protocol folks. So lots of custom zone action out there. And in fact, I think more than I anticipated in a lot of ways.
Cool. yeah, I think I'm looking forward to being able to kind of go through all of that and judge what data we've got from those.
You
See.
mentioned, Jack, some of the issues with Tendermint being stressed. We could probably jump into that.
Yeah.
I just want to make it clear, like, we're not trying to hate on Tendermint. We love Tendermint, but it's starting to show that maybe it wants to enter a more productive phase in its life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that whenever we see these networks under a huge amount of stress, it's always fascinating because you can spin up test instances and hit them with as much load as you want, but things don't feel like they do in the real world under those types of circumstances. And it's really been since Game of Stakes where we've seen this amount of coordinated spamming of Tendermint and of the SDK and sort of like testing a lot of those performance paths. And one thing that changed for this was we have protobuf that we're using for state encoding now. And that has increased the speed of state encoding and decoding, something that happens every block, by around 100 to 1,000 times. So drastically faster. That was our prior bottleneck, and it has now exposed this new bottleneck with the peer-to-peer network, where depending on the topology, blocks don't get propagated throughout the network in the right way. And Zaki and I were talking about this yesterday, and there was a great explanation for it that I kind of slipped my mind. Zaki,
So
why is that happening exactly?
Okay, so let's understand like what the topology of this network is. So we have this, 3 validator core group. So like initially what the problem was, and not surprising, is they ran out of RAM. So I saw spikes of RAM usage on some of these machines up into like the 20 gigabyte range. But not the end of the world. So then I over provisioned all of those machines up to 64 gigs and didn't see any more problems from that point of view. But it actually started to be interesting what turned out to be the actual problem, which is, so we have these 6 validator nodes, and then we have 3 sentries. And the job of the sentries is to, propagate these block parts that those block nodes are generating out into the network while keeping up themselves. And there's a couple of pieces of this that are that are frankly challenging. So one is Tendermint full nodes don't just replicate the blocks. They actually try to keep up with the entire consensus algorithm. And basically, once a full node is synced, it tries to keep up with the consensus algorithm, i.e., receiving every vote, every pre-commit, every pre-vote, every pre-commit, like going through the whole consensus process. When it's syncing up, it has like a BitTorrent sort of style, like partial node fetch, where it's kind of trying to sync blocks as quickly as possible from every peer. Once it's fully synced, it goes into this consensus falling mode. And there's no mechanism right now inside of Tendermint to fall behind and then go back into that like BitTorrent style block download mode. And because you didn't have that mechanism, our sentry nodes got overloaded, fell behind the validator nodes, and then the entire network fell behind. And we would also see periods of time where our sentry nodes were synced perfectly, like I had logs from both windows like side by side, and probably within a couple of 100 milliseconds, like a block was immediately on the sentry node, which was great. But then I would hear from a lot of the players like, I can't stay synced. So I think there's a couple of pieces of this that are probably worth thinking a lot as we try to get to like sort of consumer scale or like web scale Tendermint serving. One component of this is we probably want to refactor the way Tendermint works so that if it falls behind, it can switch back into this mode where it's just doing sort of BitTorrent style block sync, and that'll probably make things significantly better. The other piece would be the other thing that I imagine is going to be like sort of another change is going to be like having a mechanism by which Tendermint can serve blocks over transport that is not the P2P network. and sort of have blocks be served, like for instance over a CDN or something like that. And that'll truly allow Tendermint to potentially operate at like sort of web scale distribution where there's hundreds of thousands or millions of nodes that are trying to replicate and like follow a Tendermint blockchain. So I think all of those things are pretty are interesting stuff. For phase 3, I'm going to try and provision more Sentry nodes. I'm going to change the ratio of Sentry nodes, but my suspicion is that the number of Sentry nodes that I would actually have to provision in order to completely mitigate this problem without having to make those engineering changes that I previously described to Tendermint is just sort of infeasibly enormous. Like we would need, probably something on the neighborhood of 70 or 80 Sentry nodes to actually absorb the volume that we're seeing. And who knows how that would break. So all of these things are like open questions. But we're definitely I'm gonna definitely play with the parameters of the network that we set up for phase 3. But who knows?
I think that one of the things that's always really cool is when we see one of these new spots that Tendermint breaks, it's pretty quick to see like, oh, well, if we push this up to S3 and served it over a CDN, people would be able to get that. And, there are engineering answers to a lot of these challenges that we're running into, and it's just finding the engineering time and effort to make it happen to really make this platform scalable the way we want it to. And even with that, we're seeing in this competition the way that we want this network to scale through IBC successfully works very, very well, and that's been awesome to see.
Yeah, it was pretty clear that from the Sagan data that like from the FreeFlix chain and the Node A chain and the Iris chain, that we were seeing transaction volumes in excess of what we were seeing on the Game of Zones hub, which was really cool.
I think we probably want to talk a little bit about phase 3, just to give people a little bit of room to think about preparing for what's up next.
Yeah.
One thing we did talk about this week is that we're going to be relaunching the hub just to make sure that everyone starts off on the same foot, especially when it comes to tokens. It's a little bit easier and probably a much more fair experience to move in that direction. So we expect our launch procedures to begin sometime between Friday and Saturday. We'll be making some updates to GitHub the way that we do every week before a new phase starts. So just keep an eye out for that. Also,
I'm sort of like my only code change that I'm sort of debating is whether or not this like to do this message.sender fix and try and get that in.
How many lines of code is that fixed?
It's a one line of code change to fix it, as far as I can tell, and it will definitely like make the Sagan data a lot cleaner in phase 2. So we'll see. I haven't made a final decision. So
we'll run it later.
Yeah, stand by. We'll let you know if we're gonna make that one line of code change to backport a fix to the message.senders sort of accumulating across transactions.
Yeah, a couple things that we should probably mention though, like especially with the observability and the data, we're not positive how much malicious behavior or how many attacks we're actually going to be able to see through the dashboards. They might not reflect some attacks in real time, or we might not be monitoring for specific things that would be an indicator of something malicious or deceptive going on. So
it's
that's definitely something we should maybe make sure we talk about a little bit more, because we're really going to have to do some qualitative judging, and we're really going to have to see some amazing write-ups from teams about the attacks and the deception that they're trying to pull off.
So kind of what I'm imagining is going to happen. Like, I'm really hoping that somebody actually, like, for instance, double spends the between multiple blockchains, like sends a inconsistent block at like a specific height. But and like hopefully we're gonna be able to see those transfer events on Sagan. And then what will be really cool is for a team to come to us and be like, look, here's our inconsistent headers that we sent. Or here's a really clever way we were handling messages that was deceptive to people who were trying to and like sort of futzed with all the people who were trying to like get the most most packets relayed, but along the way we double spent them or XYZ other things. So because there's sort of like multiple for phase 1 and phase 2, it's kind of like everyone's doing the same thing together. Phase 3 is independent study. It's everybody's doing everything on their own. And what we're going to get out of the observability of Sagan is the ability to go and then correlate when people come to us with, this is this clever thing that we did. Oh, okay, let's like understand how that manifested in the Sagan data that we got, and then also in the, but we will be continuing with kind of the sort of similar heartbeat data to what we were doing in phase 2.
Yeah, just to pull at your point about phase 3 being a bit more of an independent study, we know a lot of teams have been preparing to pull off, potential light client attacks and doing some work in the deceptive state machine area. But in addition to, the phase rewards for the competition, there are 5 other areas where teams have basically their last week or their last shot for doing something incredible. So, depending on which adventure you want to take in this competition, your team could be doing anything from trying to make a double spend happen to trying to rack up a ridiculous number of packets to go after the most packets for the entire challenge reward. It really depends, but we're hoping to see some really incredible stuff. Also expecting to see the hub being a little unreliable and overloaded though.
Yep. Like I said, I'm going to try and probably at least double the number of Sentry nodes and try and make that topology a little bit better. But my gut feel on Tendermint engineering is that until we sort of make these like deeper architectural changes to Tendermint to cope with this level of volume, we're going to Sentry nodes are eventually going to fall behind.
Yeah. I think the final thing we should probably jump on really quickly is just what we're thinking about the light client attacks and deceptive state machines. We've discussed this a little bit among the 3 of us, but I know this is an area where we want to spend a little bit more time today, especially for teams who are getting in prep mode for next week.
So let's talk about exactly what we mean by deceptive state machines. There are 2 pieces of this. Let's start with the light client. Specifically, the light client is this idea of sending in IPC packets that are inconsistent with each other. Signing 2 different IBC packets, one packet that has, that commits to a certain app hash, and that contains an IBC packet going to chain A, another signature that sends an IBC packet going to chain B. Those 2 packets could not actually have occurred in the same chain, and it's sort of like it is essentially like a stealth hard fork of the blockchain, and that would be a very, very cool thing to see occur in the system. It would also be very cool to see someone report an equivocation event to a blockchain. That would be very, very cool. And so we're very excited to see that. Yeah, it'd be super exciting to see that. No idea whether or not anyone is going to do one of those. But like a great, like doing one and a good write up of that is going to be like a very is going to be a very strong candidate for some of the prizes. The second piece is this like idea of a deceptive state machine. So I think as everyone's familiar, the idea, the sort of the non-deceptive, the honest state machine response way of working with IBC is, someone sends me a transaction, that transaction sends me an IBC packet with some tokens that are locked on chain A, I receive them on chain B, they go to the account that I'm expecting, when I want to send them back to chain A, like I'm easily able to do that, they unlock on chain A from escrow and I'm able to move it around. A deceptive state machine is a state machine that's going to do sort of is going to futz with users' mental models and try and confuse them. You could send a chain. You could have a chain in which every packet that gets sent to the chain, instead of going to the intended recipient, goes to the the evil bank. A tax gets extracted from every transaction that if you send tokens to this chain, like a piece of it goes to this centralized account. You could also have chains where it automatically and somewhat surreptitiously, when you send a token to it, it automatically unlocks that token on the source chain by sending a packet back and gives it to the attacker. These are just off the top of my head, a bunch of clever things that people could do with deceptive state machines. And again, we would love to see that in the SIGINT data, and we would love to be able to have a really good write-up. But the write-up's going to tell us what to look for, and then we'll be able to sort of back correlate to, did this actually happen? Are there any questions in the Twitch?
Not seeing any questions in there, but let's just put out the call and wait for a few seconds, mainly about Echo. And then we had a few folks, when we had the discussion around custom zones, looks like the P2P team is hosting an open market with NFT IBC transfers, which is really, really cool. Very much looking forward to checking that out. And in the name of the collaborative sort of pixel flipping game is called Astro Canvas. And thank you, Abhishek. Really appreciate that. Any additional questions from the folks in the chat here?
This chat is going. I'm going to say this is going to anger the streaming gods, but it's going more smoothly. I'm not getting nearly as many. I haven't gotten a single notification from the streaming software where it's oh, you are.
This is by far the most stable we've seen it, and it's been wonderful.
Well,
so
it's actually gotten back to as stable as it was when I originally tested this setup. So.
Well, the software gods have clearly been upset somewhere.
Yeah, really. Maybe
I
it's
was
just
expecting the notification of dropped frames to go immediately when I said it, but so far.
Oh. Nice. I also, while we're on here, and I know some folks are on here as well, I want to say thank you very, very much for all of the PRs and issues on the relayer from everyone. I really appreciate it. And you guys have made phase 2 possible. There were a few features that I really needed to get in and had not had the time to build. And folks kind of pushed those up the last couple of weeks before phase 2. And especially the Statebird team, Jay Hernandez, pushed up the ability to do gas estimation, and then Colin Axner from the Interchamberlain team pushed up the ability to split those large multi-message transactions into much more manageable sizes that could be ingested by RPC and made that size configurable. Those two changes, I think, really enabled the transaction volume that we saw in phase 2. So thank you guys very much for making KB zones happen in a lot of ways.
Cool. Is there anyone else we need to especially thank at this phase?
Everyone, if you're playing and spending time, it's
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you
No,
guys. Like,
Yeah,
seriously.
Yeah, I
definitely
mean,
use.
we
Also, we've
appreciate it. I've tried to be pretty active and engaged in the channels and talking to people as we've been going along for this whole like week. Yeah, I know we're all in kind of this fog of inconsistent data, like early software, like all of this stuff, like not refined models. But that is the nature of something that's very early and very new. Is just kind of like we are all trying to figure out how to manage and observe all of this together. Um, this isn't a finished system yet. Cool. Anything else? Oh, I can't hear anyone.
Sorry, Zaki. I was muted. I'm just talking.
I was like
nothing's
very
going
confused. I'm like I could see Jack's lips moving.
on. Ah! Okay, so Abhishek asks, can the submission for custom zone not be a custom zone and be instead a modded relayer? As in, a modded relayer be a submission for any challenge? We've been trying to prioritize time, honestly, more than the interest to work. So I think what he's asking is, are we going to award rewards to folks who add relayer PRs? And it's my understanding that we were thinking about that. I didn't know if we had a specific section for that in the rewards.
Are you looking, Jessy, or what do you think?
one thing that we don't actually have in there is how to manage the relayer contributions. It's a bit separate from the overall scope of the competition, but we can see if we have any opportunities. We've talked about developer bounties as an ecosystem in the past. We can see if there's something we can come up with, but I don't know if we can promise anything because we are pretty tight on that initial prize allocation.
So I see a question in the Telegram, kind of going back to the confusing nature of multi-packets. So what we're saying is for the phase 2 winners, we're going to count multi-packets as a single packet. But for the overall most packets relayed throughout the entire competition prize, we are going to individually count the individual sub-packets within the multi-message. Did that answer your question? We thought that there was an efficient way of cutting the Gordian knot. We see a lot of multi-messages in the Sagan data. It's really cool. It also was like, frankly, until phase 2, not a thing that like I'd ever seen before, and I didn't even know what the data would look like. I think people first started asking me multi-message questions like 12 hours before phase 2 started, and I was like, cool, I don't have any software for generating multi-messages, and I certainly didn't test anything against it. But at least now we have 50 gigabytes of data or 80 gigabytes of data, which contains tons of multi-messages. So I feel like probably by the end of the weekend I'll have a fairly good handle on what multi-messages are and what they mean. And certainly for this last week, if you're competing for the most messages relayed prize, go crazy with multi-messages. Any other questions in the chat? And we'll update the scope on GitHub to cover this whole naughty issue of how to deal with multi-messages.
Yeah, we basically have an unofficial Friday afternoon tradition of just yelling at each other in Signal until all the tiny details have been worked out. So we'll make sure we go through one of our last ceremonies for that this week.
Yep. Ship and iterate, right?
Yeah. It's not really yelling. It's more like, oh my God, again. But
there are so many tiny details to these competitions that it's a challenge to stay on top of them all and not be super reactive. Yeah, we sort of picked this structure, and there are trade-offs in the structure. But yeah, We like really just want to, you know, like I said, I think, you know, it's very important for the Cosmos community to like keep their eye on the ball. And the eye on the ball was how do we get to launching IBC and getting an internet of blockchains and getting all of the composability and innovation that we've all been hoping that this network would provide. And that is like we're A, clearly making like huge progress towards it through this competition, and B, like the biggest value is like this group of people of who are participating in Game of Zones and learning how IBC works. And
I mean, Zaki, one of the things that I've heard from you continually is just like how blown away you are by the fact that people not only use this stuff but find it useful and build businesses on top of it, and it's really cool, and it's really cool to see this like full vision that we've all been working on collectively together sort of become realized in Game of Zones, and really looking forward to seeing it live on mainnet.
Yep. Cool. Okay, I think I'm good. If there are
Yep,
unless there are any more questions in Twitch.
I think that's a wrap for this week, guys.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Can't wait to see what you get up to next week.
Cool.
You cut it?
Yep. I'm going
Okay.
to end the stream.